to Kristin. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Happy April to
I
you.
know,
How
isn't
are
that
you?
crazy?
Time flies.
It's insane. So, I cannot wait to talk about what you wrote on Monday. I loved it. Not that I don't love everything that you write, but you took something that I think we as Disney fans all see, and probably more often than not get a little bit annoyed by, right? And that is
Yeah.
this idea of maintenance and refurbishment and things that we love get hidden behind scrims, and it takes us out of the magic, right? Like,
Yep.
why does Main Street have to be under these tarps in the middle of my trip, right?
Right.
So, yeah, tell us about all that.
Yeah, it's so funny because first of all, again, educator, and we're in this season of we just came out of spring break and we've got our sights set on summer vacation. And it's like
You're
the
down
final
the home
stretch.
stretch.
We're in the home stretch. And I just thought, man, if there was any time as we're approaching this season, for those of you that don't know, the home stretch is actually final exam season and end of year testing season and, wrapping up the report card season. And I thought, man, if there was any time to justify a trip back to Main Street, I sure deserve it right now. And I
Of
even looked
course.
into it. And all over social media, I'm seeing people posting these pictures of Main Street Scrim. And I thought, my God, I can't possibly justify going to see Main Street covered in a bunch of tarps. And I was
Not your beloved Main Street, right?
right, right. And I was so frustrated. And what was so crazy is that all of a sudden, due to the heavy winds that we had, this whole like wind gust that came through, even here in Vegas,
Mhm.
thank God for the winds because it blew just enough to where they determined it wasn't safe anymore to keep the scrim up because, of course, it kind of creates like a balloon, a hot air balloon or, like a kite. And down with the scrim means down with all of the scaffolding. And we can't have scaffolding falling on people in Main Street. So they took it down. And when they did, lo and behold, it exposed the original hand-painted signs from the Carnation, not cafe, Carnation Company, which was what the original title was of that area. And that's a tie into, they used to sell flowers
Mhm.
on Main Street. Not a lot of people know that. They would actually sell artificial floral bundles that people could take home to have on display at their house. So it ties back to the very beginning of Walt's design of Main Street. And I took one look at that picture that someone posted. In fact, it's our friends over at Sometimes Castles. You got to make sure you follow them on socials. They've got some amazing footage of the scrim and better yet, what's hiding behind the scrim. And I just thought, wow, I got so upset and allowed myself to justify not being there because I didn't want to be bothered by things not looking perfect and pristine because it might take away from the magic when in reality, the opposite was true. I could argue that something even more magical has been hiding right there in plain sight behind the facade that has been updated over the years. And
Mhm.
of course, now, if you're a fan of Disneyland and you walk down Main Street, you know that it's the Carnation Cafe. And that's the signage right now that's been removed. And so, what a great aha moment. I took one look at it and I thought, that's my Mondays on Main Street because I know personally I have made hundreds of trips down Main Street over the
Mhm.
years. And if I'm being honest, I myself was covered just like that sign in my own scrim. In other words, I wanted to hide who I really was, my passions, my dreams that I was too afraid of pursuing. And I wanted to protect myself and play it safe. So I covered myself in other things, in other distractions, in other pursuits that may have had short term, benefits and a short term return on my investment, but not long-term gain, not long-term fulfillment. And so for me, there was much hope for not only myself, but for our readers and our listeners that small voice, that hidden sign, that true identity of who you are and what excites you and what gets you up in the morning and the thing that you think about that you really want to achieve one day, let that out because that is so much more magical and so much more beautiful sometimes than all of these other layers of stuff, that we're hiding behind. So yeah, I hope that it was encouraging for
Yeah, I
all
just
of our
love
readers.
the idea of quote unquote scrap the scrim, right?
Yeah.
And, we're all under construction. We are all in need of maintenance. We're all under constant refurbishment, but we don't want to admit that, right? It feels too vulnerable. And as a result, we go find something, not a scrim per se, but something like a scrim that
Yeah.
hides the truth, hides the reality, keeps the real us from actually being seen. And as a result, the original authentic Jeff, Kristin, whomever never really gets to see the light of day. And
Yeah.
I love that analogy. I love what you were able to do with that. And I think it's a great reminder that, if we go back to our original selves, whoever that is, whenever that was. And I know for me, Lindsay's done a lot of work around this as well. And I think you can identify with this. It's typically somewhere around the age of 7 or 8 that we
Mhm.
learn, that who we are for whatever reason isn't okay. And, we learn to, build a little bit of a facade here. We start putting together some scrim there. And by the time we reach adulthood, that original carnation is nowhere to be found.
Yeah.
And so, I love that, you've unearthed it. I love that, I write about this in my first book. My favorite childhood toy was a model train. I loved Lionel Railroad sets, and my mom
Yeah.
had a map of Disneyland from her visit back in 1959, 1960, and I would take that map and put it in the middle of the railroad track, and I would play with it over and over and over again, age 7, 8, 9, like whatever. And that hasn't changed, right? I mean,
No.
I'm still doing it. And, when Walt built the park, he was building it as the toy that he never had as a child. It represents, him, getting out not just from underneath the studio, but out from underneath his scrim as well and
Mhm.
saying to the world, "This is what I've always wanted, and this
Yeah.
is who I've always been." And I think that's just great.
I love that, and it ties into 2 things before we touch on what you talked about this week, because it rolls right into that too, but Peter Pan is the ride of choice that we make a beeline for right
Mhm.
after we walk down
Well,
Main
you have
Street.
to if you don't wanna wait 45.
Right, exactly, that's the only workaround, but don't give away our secret. But that's the heartbeat of Peter Pan, and I think that's it, around 7 or 8, right? You make the world starts creeping in, and you have to really be intentional to never grow up, to not lose sight of that, to save yourself from the scrim because it's coming. It's gonna be
Yeah.
very, very tempting.
Why do we have to grow up? I think Walt asked that
Right.
question one time.
Yeah, and I hope that we keep and our listeners keep asking ourselves, why do we? Because we can both argue we don't have to. And your article this week was so beautifully tied into that, not even intentionally, I think. I love that you shared the photo of Walt's desk, and I'll let you talk more on that. I love the picture of both of your books on it. I could just see Walt smiling looking down on that because I guarantee you he'd be such a fan of the books that you've put out. But, if we're not careful, we allow ourselves to be measured and use society's barometer of success as our own. And both you and I come from education
Mhm.
backgrounds. And we know very well how our students feel and how they're measured and how they are seen as worthy or unworthy based on GPA, and graduation rates and statistics and all of that. And that can also be part of our scrim too. Like, yeah, I may have graduated top of my class, but am I really doing what I was called to do and what I'm really passionate about? And that's something that Walt chased. And so that's going to lead us right into your fantastic article that also tied into April Fool's Day. And yeah, just talk to us about that and kind of what led into that decision.
Yeah, so my article comes out on Wednesdays, and Wednesday happened to be April Fool's Day. Interestingly enough, that day ties back to when we had a calendar shift in the 1600s. And, some people either didn't get the memo or didn't like the change because we as human beings aren't big fans of change.
No,
Or
no.
more than likely, they didn't like the fact that the government or an institution like the church was telling them they had to change. And as a result of the calendar switch, New Year's Day was going to go from late March, early April to what we have now, and that is January 1st.
Mm,
Well, some people refused to switch.
hmm
And the people that hung on to April 1st as being New Year's Day and continued to celebrate were eventually labeled quote unquote April Fools. And I think that's just a fascinating history. And today we very much live in a world where society tells us, institutions tell us that you have to have credentials. And I'm a big supporter of education, but I think more importantly, we need to be supporters of lifelong learning. And Walt's a great example of that. Walt did not have the credentials that most of us would be seeking, if not looking for, in 2026. Never got past ninth grade in his formal education. Instead, he wanted to help out in the war effort, this being World War One. He was too young and eventually signed up for service in the ambulance corps and never returned to high school. Never graduated
Hmm,
high school, never went to college. He would eventually get honorary degrees, and he would go on to recognize that while he was honored by those, of course, they weren't the same as earning them.
sure.
And he would go on record to say, it's not diplomas or degrees that make you successful. And then the
Yeah.
follow-up was, well, what is it? And then he famously said, I think it comes down to 4 C's. And those 4 C's for Walt Disney are curiosity, consistency, courage, and confidence. And then he would say, and out of the 4, confidence is most important. And so, the reason why I wrote about this on April Fool's Day is I don't want us to be fooled into thinking we have to have credentials to be successful. If you have to choose the 4 C's. And then, as
Amen.
we talked about 3 months ago, every single day can be New Year's Day. So, yeah, we've started the 4th month of 2026. We started the 2nd quarter of 2026, and, whatever day you're listening to this can be New Year's Day. It just doesn't matter.
Yeah, I love that. And then you've got an opportunity rolling out here soon with you and Mr. Lee
That's
Cockrell.
right. Yeah, so,
So tell
the
us
4
about
Cs
that.
really has been a focus of a lot of my writing and teaching over the years. It is the longest chapter in either one of my books, Mastering the 4 Cs. And so on April 16th, we're doing a free live webinar. Lee Cockrell is going to be joining me as a special guest on mastering those 4 Cs. And so if you're interested about how can you be more curious, if you're interested in how can you be more consistent, if you're interested in how can you be more courageous or more confident, this is the webinar for you. And of course, we're going to share curiosity and constant and courageous and confident stories from the life of Walt Disney, but most importantly, how those stories can apply to you. And I have a pretty passionate belief, and that is every one of us naturally has one of those 4 Cs that we do without even thinking about it. Mine's
Mm,
curiosity. I'm just naturally and insatiably curious. And another one of the 4 Cs that we genuinely struggle with and have to truly invest in and truly work on. And so if you want to learn more about all of the 4 Cs or try to figure out what you need to do in one of the 4 to sort of shore that one up. Again, April 16th. And if you're not available, it's going to be at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Even if you're not available to join us live, go ahead and register because then you'll be eligible to watch the recorded version. I've done a few webinars in the past. This is the first time I've had the honor of having Lee Cockrell, retired executive vice president of Walt Disney World, join me. And that is going to be a special treat. And I'm really looking forward to the webinar.
I am so excited to get both of you in the same room at the same time to go deeper on something that I'm so passionate about. And friends, I'm not just saying this, because I happen to do a podcast with Jeff Barnes, but honestly, this book absolutely got me thinking about my life differently and how I have been hiding behind my own scrim and how, yeah, I am very curious. But going back to what we talked about earlier, we are not necessarily set up in institutions that really want us asking too many questions. We're supposed to fall in line and fit into a box. And so this book, The Wisdom of Walt, really opened the first door for me to take the first steps into being able to do what I love right now, which is what I'm doing at this very moment. And I've have had the time of my life. And so to go even deeper then with the expertise, of course, of Lee paired with you. I am so excited for that. So hopefully you guys are able to register and join us. And then if not, be there live, of course, go back and watch it when your schedule allows. So let this fourth month of the year be the month that you dedicate yourself to learning and mastering the 4 C's.